Sanibonani Moroy. Welcome to the Girls Table Talk Show, a show that gives young women a platform to share their experiences on issues that affect them. We are heading towards the 2023 harmonized election, so everything is about elections. So I'd want to understand from Utaku today what is the state of youth representation in politics. But before we delve into that conversation, I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is, for those who don't know, my name is Takunda Tsunga, and I'm the Senior Programs Officer with the Election Resource Center.
Thank you so much. I'm happy now we know each other, Takunda. What is the current state of youth representation in politics? Sikuluma ngama elections that we are going to, but the general representation, really.
Yeah, I think when we are discussing issues around youth participation in elections, especially as we head towards the 2023 election, it's important for us to note that the Gazette, or the general notice which published the names of candidates for local authority for member of parliament, they unfortunately did not have the ages or the date of births of the candidates themselves. So this makes it difficult for civil society organizations, for political parties themselves to be able to understand the true gravity of youth representation, because the Electoral Commission has not availed the voters' roll for people to be able to verify the statistics of youth participation. But I think from the Election Resource Center, we carried out a brief analysis of the National Assembly candidates in Bulawayo, and taking into account the first 5 constituencies in Bulawayo in terms of alphabetical order, which are Bulawayo Central, Bulawayo North, Bulawayo South, Kaudri Park, and Emakhandeni Luveve constituency. The average age for those constituencies is 46, leaning towards 47. We've only got 2 candidates who qualify as youths right now, which is the CCC representative for Kaudri Park, Pashwa Swanda, who's 29, and Decent Bachila, representative of CCC as well for Emakhandeni Luveve constituency, and he's 35. So I think this gives you an indication that out of the 11 candidates in these respective constituencies, only 2 are youths, and that gives you a kind of an indication of where we stand as youths. And I think it's also important to note that in terms of youth representation, youths are more open to participating in urban areas. So once you go to the rural communities, these statistics are only going to worsen. And I think it's very concerning, as we are basically 1 month away from an election, that the current state of youth participation is as it stands.
Thank you so much. You talked about youth, and you talked about someone who's 29 and 35. Can you define the youth in Zimbabwe in terms of the Constitution of Zimbabwe? Who do we regard as youth according to the Constitution?
So in terms of the Constitution, it's Section 20 of the Constitution. It basically gives an outline of what is defined as a youth. In terms of Zimbabwe, a youth is defined as a young person between the ages of 18 and 35. That is when we're talking in terms of political participation and elections. This is the age bracket for a youth.
On the 21st of June, it was nomination court day. And I take it you might have observed the proceedings. Anything that you picked up, anything that you would share in relation to the nomination court day?
So I think in terms of the nomination court, it was, holistically speaking, when you're looking at it from the outside looking in, the Electoral Commission opened up the nomination process 10 days before the sitting of the nomination court itself. They opened the process for nominations on the 10th of June, which allowed political parties to go with their papers, to verify the authenticity of their papers, to go through the nomination procedures themselves. So it was quite alarming and unfortunate that what we witnessed on the nomination day itself is that there was a mad rush to the nomination courts by political parties. They had not taken opportunity to avail themselves to the commission before the nomination court day. So this resulted in a lot of nomination day confusion, where the nomination courts were overwhelmed by the number of candidates that sought to submit their nomination papers on the day. The nomination court was overwhelmed by people or prospective candidates who needed assistance in terms of their paperwork for nomination. So this is what this is some of the stuff that we witnessed as the Election Resource Center. I think it's also important to note that while there's a lot of confusion, there were minimal incidences of violence, there were minimal incidences of politically motivated harassment on a nomination day. I think people were just going through the processes smoothly.
I also had the same privilege to interact with the political leaders who were submitting their papers, and some people were saying they are having a challenge because you come to the nomination court in the morning with your RTGS using yesterday's rate, then in the morning you find out that the rate has changed. What does that mean? Really for someone who's saying, but you had said $20,000 is equivalent to 300,000, but today I have my 300,000 and it's no longer the same rate. So how should those people behave? What do you do when you find yourself in such a situation?
I think in terms of the nomination fees, it's important to note that firstly, the nomination fees were quite exorbitant. I think they were unrealistic in the context of the Zimbabwean economy, that where on average, the average Zimbabwean is living off less than $10 a day, living off less than $5 a day. It's disingenuous and it's quite unfair to create a process that becomes, or a process that only enables those who are rich, I'll put that in quotation marks, those who are privileged, if I may say, to be able to participate in these processes. So the nomination fees were unfair. And then I think the confusion around the nomination fees on election day, like you highlighted, I think it's testament to the confusion that is the state of our economy at the current state, where you wake up today and you don't really know what the functional rate is. And we received comments, issues like that as well, around candidates and political parties failing to submit candidates because of issues around the banking system. And I think it's unfair on the candidates themselves. It's unfair on political parties for them to be able, or for them to be restricted in terms of expressing their political will based on a banking system which they have no control over. And I think what the Electoral Commission was supposed to do was come out on nomination day and publicly announce what the rate would be on such a day, so that there's certainty around the procedure. I think the lack of certainty around the electoral processes and procedures that the Electoral Commission carries out is a hindrance to free and fair participation.
I'll have to pack my question. I have a question really about the nomination fees, but in terms of interacting with some of the candidates, I had a young woman who was saying she got to participate under the youth quota system, where you have to bring your O-level certificate. Can you just give us an insight about that youth quota system? How does it work?
So I think the youth quota system, it was implemented in 2021 through Constitutional Amendment number 2. It's a 10% proportional representation, not 10%, 10-seat proportional representation system, where there's 1 seat assigned to youths per province. Basically, it's based off the number of votes that a political party gets in a specific province. So taking Bulawayo, for example, the political party with the highest number of votes in Bulawayo province is the one that will be able to nominate a youth for this youth quota. And in terms of the requirements, it's pretty unfortunate that the Electoral Commission, I think they only published the requirements for the youth quota about 2 weeks before, or a week and a half before the nomination court itself. This is one of the problems that we've identified in terms of the conduct of the Electoral Commission, and where there was no clarity around what requirements were needed. And I think this candidate themselves, where they were requested to provide O-level certificates, there's no provision in the Electoral Act, there's no provision in the regulations of the Electoral Commission regulations themselves, there's no provision in the Constitution itself that requires one to submit O-level certificates for nomination.
Now we are talking about the nomination fees being too high, meaning politics is now politics.
Yeah.
We are talking about O-level. What does it mean for us who went as far as Form 2, who do not have O-level certificates? So I've had a podcast talking to Linda about the impact of nomination fees on women's participation. I've had a Twitter space again talking to Elizabeth Valerio, talking about the nomination fees being an obstacle to women's participation. Linda and Valerio told me that they are in the process of going to court to fight about the issue of the nomination fees. I think they said they had RTGS. Unfortunately, their money on had not reflected.
Yeah.
So since we know that it's RTGS, it takes forever to reflect. So what does that mean? What if they win the case on maybe on the 21st of August? What does it mean for them? Yes, you will participate as a president, but you never had a chance to even campaign. So the case is still dragging. What does it mean for them? Do they have a chance or?
I think for people who have submitted their issues to the nomination court, I think the most important date to take note of is the date that the ballot papers are going to be printed. While the Electoral Commission does not provide for a specific date for when the ballot papers should be printed, however, the Commission is going to publicly announce, or they should publicly announce, when ballot papers should be printed. So once ballot papers are printed, I think it's very difficult administratively for the Commission to come out and try and change the number of ballots, because if, for example, in a presidential election, they will be printing, in the current state, they'll be printing about 7.5 million ballot papers for the election itself. So I think once the ballot papers are printed, it will be quite difficult for there to be changes to the ballot paper. But this is why there's a requirement of the Electoral Commission to actually, not the Electoral Commission, the Electoral Court and the High Court, to deal with these electoral issues in an expedient manner, to deal with these electoral issues in a timely manner, where they address these issues pronto, if I may say, so that there's certainty in the electoral environment around who's participating and who's not participating. So I hope that definitely by the end of July, there's clarity around this issue. I think today there was a court order which disqualified Xavier Kasukwere from participating, and I think this gives clarity around who's participating, and the way in which they've dealt the time in which they've dealt with this case is the time in which they should be dealing with all cases, to ensure that there's full or equal participation of all.
You said something about Xavier Kasukwere. On what terms was he disqualified? Because in a democratic country, everyone has a right to run as a presidential candidate. Kulumi mali yako.
Yeah.
About the nomination issue.
So I think in terms of Xavier Kosugwere's disqualification, it was based off an application that was filed last month, soon after the nomination court, where an applicant, I forgot the name of the applicant himself, but the applicant, he went to the High Court seeking an order declaring that Xavier Kasugwe should be disqualified from running for election on the basis that he's been away from Zimbabwe for over 18 months. So he's disqualified. Because he should not be on the voters' roll. That was the basis of the application itself. And I think the grounds in which the court have discussed, I've briefly gone over the judgment itself. He touches on certain issues, but that is basically the premise of the case, that he's been away from Zimbabwe for over 18 months, so he's no longer qualified as a registered voter, so he cannot stand for election.
I'm getting lost.
Okay, so
I want to understand now, if I want to participate as a candidate, that means 18 months before the elections I should be in Zimbabwe, or can you?
Okay, so I think the requirements for a presidential election: you must be over 40 years of age, you must be a registered voter, and you must be ordinarily resident in Zim. So, and you must pay the prescribed nomination fee. So, Xavier was above 40 years old. He paid the nomination fee. So the big issues was he still a registered voter? And then was he ordinarily resident in Zimbabwe? So issues around whether he's a registered voter in terms of the Electoral Act. If you are away for a continuous period of more than 12 months, the Electoral Commission is able to remove you from the voters' roll in the ward or constituency which you reside. So there was an application that was filed that stated that he had been living in South Africa for a period of 12 months. So the Electoral Commission ought to have removed him from the voters' roll. Therefore, he will no longer be a registered voter, thereby disqualifying him from standing as a presidential election, because he does not fulfill the requirement that one has to be a registered voter in the constituency or in Zimbabwe for to stand for presidential election. So that's the cycle that they've taken to disqualify Xavier Kasugwe from election.
I understand what you're saying, but I'm worried about our parents who are in the diaspora, South Africa, who've been away for about 6 years. That means they no longer qualify as registered voters in Zimbabwe.
So in terms of disqualification, it's a very difficult process. I think this is the first public case where someone is being removed from the voters' roll for being away for a period of over 12 months. I think the difficulty that the Electoral Commission has in terms of removing people from the voters' roll is, how do you prove that someone has been away from a constituency or from a ward for a period of continuous period of over 12 months. The Electoral Commission does not have the capacity, does not have the personnel to be able to investigate every single complaint that is filed to them stating that person X has been away from a constituency or ward. So I think in terms of our parents, we may be safe for now. Whether the Electoral Commission changes their conduct in terms of removing, that is still to be seen. But it's also important to know that when the Electoral Commission is removing people from a voters' roll, they must first publish a gazette with the names of those who are intended to be removed, and then they must allow those who want to be removed to be given an opportunity to respond to the allegations that have been laid out. So it's a lengthy process for removal of the voters' roll, and I don't see the Commission in this current state carrying out this exercise within the next 5 years. They simply don't have the capacity.
Okay, I'm happy you're saying our parents say to some extent.
For now.
Yeah, for now. Okay, thank you so much, Takunda, for explaining this out for me, because I was getting worried. We have parents who hardly come to Zimbabwe often. So yeah, we are worried. Some of them want to come and vote, but you are worried maybe she's no longer in the voters' roll. You are talking about the voters' roll, and there's been conversations about the voters' roll. How are we going to vote? We don't have the voters' roll. What is the voters' roll, and why is it so important for us to be talking about it just before the election?
So in layman's terms, a voter's roll is basically a document that is there for people to be able to prove who is entitled to vote in a particular election. So I think for one to be able to register to vote, you must be resident in a particular ward or constituency. You must be above the age of 18. So for you to qualify, or for you to be able to vote, you must be on a voter's roll, so that you are able to prove that you're entitled to vote in a particular ward or at a particular polling station. So I think this is the document that is called the voter's roll. And then why it's important? It's important because it's a primary document that political parties and electoral stakeholders are able to verify the credibility of an election. I think when you speak of election rigging, when you speak of electoral malpractice, I think the first thing people speak about is ballot stuffing. The ballot box was stuffed. So a voter's roll, it helps with issues around ballot stuffing, because you are able to prove that at polling station X, there are only 1,000 people who are supposed to vote at this polling station. And if there are 1,050 ballot papers in that polling station, then you know already that there's been electoral malpractice. So I think that is primarily what a voter's roll is. It enables stakeholders to know who's supposed to vote at which location.
I take it the voters' roll is really important. But what happens to people who were saying during the voters' roll inspection, I went there again, I couldn't find my name.
Yeah.
I'm checking with the *265#. My name is not there, but I registered to vote. What does that mean?
So the difficulty or the problems that happened in terms of the voter inspection period, we also encountered a number of cases, especially in Bulawayo. It's a result of the delimitation process. So the delimitation process changed the boundaries of constituencies. And through this delimitation process, the Electoral Commission also shifted a number of citizens from one polling station to another, so that each ward has an equal number of registered voters. So what happened is that the Electoral Commission changed they changed people's polling stations, and unfortunately they did not inform citizens of the changes that have been made to people's polling stations. So I think this is the confusion that is currently faced by the public. And when you engage with the Electoral Commission, they simply state that the voters' roll is continually being updated, so people should always continually look to through the *265 platform and try to search for the polling station. But it's also important to note that for the 2023 election, the voters' roll will be published outside polling stations 48 hours before the election. So citizens will have 48 hours to try and go around their polling stations and to look for where they're going to be voting. And in terms of the movement of polling stations, while people were moved, they were not moved to a polling station that is beyond 2 kilometers from where the existing polling station was. So they need to go within the vicinity of their polling station to look for where their names could have been changed.
But so to say, we have young people who are already voter apathetic. Imagine me going to all the schools, polling stations around me just to check for my name. We are already dragging our feet really to register to vote. And you talked about the issue of delimitation process. Some people are no longer in the same polling station that they knew. So I would encourage people to check for their name so that you know which polling station you are voting in, because I realized mine is no longer the same. I've been changed to a different polling station. So it's important to dial *265# to know your polling station. So during the nomination courts, there were issues around double candidates for some political parties. Please explain to me, because in my mind, I'm thinking, if political party X wants Vege to be their candidate for Makwekwe Lopengula, they somehow sign for that. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
They should sign. So how come can the same person who's sign for two candidates in the same constituency? I'd want to understand the issue about double candidates for some political parties in the same constituency. How does that work?
So, in terms of double candidacy, I think defining double candidacy, it's basically two representatives of the same party in the same ward or constituency. We carried out an analysis of the nomination court results. We saw that there are 20 constituencies where there are double candidates in National Assembly, and those double candidates are all in the CCC party. But it's also important to note that the CCC has also distanced itself from those candidates, and they've stated that those candidates fraudulently submitted their nomination papers, or allegedly they fraudulently submitted their nomination papers. And then in terms of local authority, they are, in total, there are about 35 cases of double candidates. There are 21 or 25 for the CCC, if I'm not mistaken. There are 4 cases of double candidates for ZANU-PF, and there's 1 case of double candidates for ZCPD. This is the local authority level. And then CCC has also, once again, distanced itself from 21 double candidates at local authority level. However, there are 4 double candidates that have still not been addressed by the CCC. ZANU-PF as well has not addressed the 4 double candidates at local authority level for that party. And then I'm sorry, I'm taking a bit of time, but then I think why double candidatures happen. Firstly, it shouldn't happen. The current electoral framework protects political parties and candidates from issues around double candidatures. So I think before nomination court, the Electoral Commission calls on political parties to submit signatories for local authority, for National Assembly and presidential election, people who sign on to these nomination representative of political parties who sign on these nomination papers. So what's supposed to happen on nomination day is that through section 4610 of the Electoral Act, the nomination officer, once he's received papers from representative of the political parties, so double candidates, for example, the Electoral Commission, in order to avoid confusion on election day, because they have a duty to protect voters on election day from confusion. So they're supposed to engage the political parties where there have been double candidatures and then verify to the authenticity of these papers, like who is the true representative of the political party that is being represented in the nomination court. So in terms of the current situation where CCC is claiming that they're representative or malified representatives of who submitted their nomination papers, I think the Electoral Commission was supposed to protect. However, there are genuine cases where candidates or political parties submit 2 representatives to represent them in a constituency and in a ward, and I think that is now up to political parties to actually address their own internal issues that have led to the situation arising where they have 2 candidates submitting. But in terms of double candidates as well, I think it's also necessary for political parties to rein in their candidates and to call on their candidates that even if there's been issues around double candidates, there's still time for candidates to withdraw. I think this is an internal issue and it should be dealt within the confines of a political party. But then the Electoral Commission should protect political parties from people who purport to be representatives of political parties, which they're not.
Okay, thank you. We've seen videos really where the electorate is saying, but we don't want Bege as our MP. We wanted so and so. Is there anything that we can do? Because the person that is elected for our constituents is not the person that we wanted, is not the person that we voted for to represent us. So is there anything that we can do, or if after the nomination court, as long as Begezela is now the official candidate for Makwekwe Bengula, it stays like that, the electorate no longer have a say?
So in terms of after the nomination court, I think proverbially speaking, you play the hand you're dealt. So you must vote for a candidate within those who've been nominated for election. But I think it's very important for us as the electorate to hold political parties to account, to hold representatives of political parties to account. So where there have been candidates who have been so-called imposed in particular areas, I think there's various ways in which us as the electorate can actually hold political parties to account. In Bulawayo, for example, there are a number of constituencies, there are a number of political parties who are representing or who have representatives in these various constituencies. I think it's important for us to open our ears, open our eyes, and listen to what alternative political parties have to say in a case where there has been or where the electorate feels aggrieved by the conduct of the political parties in their candidate selection processes.
Okay, we are joined by young women. Like I said, this is a show that amplifies young women's voices on socio-economic, political, and cultural issues. So, since we are going towards the 2023 harmonized elections, we would want to find out, Uguti, how is the mood out there? Are young people going to register? Are young people going to vote now that they've registered to vote? Or kusadingeka ukuthi abantu baye bagqugquzela futhi ukuthi bahambe baye vota? So, may you introduce yourself?
I'm Kimberly Nkomo. I'm coming from Plumtree. So we are here talking about the impacts that affects the women, the young women.
Kimberly, ngicela ukubuza ukuthi how is the mood at Plumtree? Like into yama elections isifikile kumbe akukakhanyi ukuthi abantu bazovota kuthule. Ngiyangizwa abanye besithi towards elections ngeke sokulabantu besinika ama t-shirt, ama poster and everything. How is the mood at Plumtree?
Until imood ePlumtree like isilokhu kukhuzela abantu ukuthi bahambe beregister ukuvota before the elections efika.
Voter registration is still going on. So I'm happy we have Utaku who's going to explain what it means for someone who is registering to vote after. So kudluli 2 days after the proclamation of the voting day. Kusho ukuthini Taku, if someone registered to vote now, are they going to participate in the 2023 harmonized elections? What does it mean?
Yeah, so the proclamation closes 2 days after, the voters roll closes 2 days after proclamation, which was on the 2nd of June. So unfortunately for this current election that we're dealing with, the voters roll closed already. So for those who are registering now, like in the case of that you're saying in Plumtree, they are only going to be able to qualify or to be able to vote for elections after the 23rd of August election. So if a by-election arises in Plumtree, in the constituency, or in the wards, or the next harmonized elections, that is when you'll be able to vote. But for this election, those who registered to vote after the 2nd of June will not be able to.
I felt the need to clarify that, Uguti, if you register to vote after the 2nd of June, just know you won't be voting with us on the 23rd of August 2023. You will vote for our elections as we are after that. But the 23 August is for us as a voter, as a registered voter before the 23rd. Do you think young people, especially a Plumtree, bayazazi izinto ezihambisana lokuregister ukuvota sisikhathi esikhuluma ukuthi lisa-register ukuvota? Do people know ngezinto nje zama-electoral processes, ukuvota, i-voter education? Have we done enough voter education ukuthi abantu abatsha bazwisise why should they register to vote, why should they vote?
Like abantu abatsha abaku-understand ukuthi bavotelani because babona ukuthi izinto azihambi kahle, abatholi imisebenzi, abatholini. But ezithina siyakwanisa ukuba encourage ukuthi bahambe bevota, belokhu zizikhalo zabo ukwenza ukuthi izikhalo zabo zizwakale ukuthi bona bafunani, then they can get into abazifunayo.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. I hope abantu abatsha will go out in numbers and register and vote ngomhla 23 August, because your vote is your voice. Ngiphenduke kuwe Thako. We are going to 23 August very soon. I'm sure we are close to 23 August, not even 2 months. What can we expect, especially in terms of young people voting? Should we go out again and do voter education so that they go and vote, or C-sharp as a story, they will definitely go and vote?
In terms of the 23 August election, there needs to be deliberate efforts to mobilize the youth to go out to vote on election day. There's need to mobilize young women to go out to register. I think it will be a mistake and it will be foolhardy for us to assume that once someone registered, if someone registers, they will simply avail themselves to participate in the election. I think taking into account voter turnout in 2018, which was one of the more open elections that in recent history, I think voter turnout in 2018 was around 82% for that election, which shows that there were 18% of those who were registered did not avail themselves to register to vote, and that election itself was open. This election, there's increased apathy. People are not bothered by the election. There are fears around the freeness and fairness of the election themselves, which have contributed to the reduction in participation levels. So I think without increased efforts to mobilize the citizens, we are staring in a very dark hole of electoral participation.
I hope we meet one day to have a conversation really ukuthi ngomsebenzi that CSO ZEC is doing in voter education, getting young people to register to vote. Why again sokumele sibuyele kibo sebacela ukuthi bavote? Do they see the importance of registering to vote and subsequently voting?
Yeah.
How does it affect them at local level? Because it's so difficult. It's too much work really, especially because this is us giving them a voice. Now you have a voice in these elections, go and vote. I don't understand if they understand them voting, what does it mean really? But siyabonga kakhulu for gracing us with their presence. Until next time, lapho siyabe sikhuluma khona about issues that affect young women. From me, ubekezela siyabonga, is the Girls Table. Don't forget to follow us on our social media pages. Twitter, table_girls. Facebook, it's the Girls Table. Instagram, the.girlstable. Uhambe ku YouTube uyasibukela sikhuluma isiphila. Thank you so much. Siyabonga.
Thank you for having me.